Yo guys, what is up? Here we are with another reading video. And today we are on to chapter 13. And let's get right into it because I'm really excited. And today's book suggestion is Hunt for Red October. So maybe earlier in one of my earlier videos, I forget which one, I suggested Tom Clancy. Well, Tom Clancy is the author of Hunt for Red October. That is one of his first books that he originally wrote. There are now a lot. That's just putting it slightly. So, yeah. So I think without further ado, let's get into it. Without further ado, let's get into the book. Chapter 13. When they finally reached the farm, Zara's eyelids were drooping and her ankle was throbbing, but she pressed onward with her last scraps of strength. About halfway up her driveway, she stopped and looked at Bastian, who was shivering in his wet shirt and trousers. "Maybe I should walk alone from here," she said, "in case my uncle wakes up." "I don't think you should risk re-injuring your ankle," he said, teeth chattering. "It's not very far, and I'm sure you want to head home yourself." Zara had to be firm about this. If her uncle awoke and saw her with Bastian, she didn't want to think what he would say or do to both of them. Reluctantly, Bastian unlocked his arm from hers. "Remember to ice your ankle and elevate it if you can. It will be sore for a few days." "All right," Zara said. Out of habit, she added a quick "Erhurt." An amused look shone in his amber eyes. "After tonight, I think you can call me Bastian." She started to shake her head. "I couldn't." "It's fine, really." He ran a hand through his wet hair. Above them, the clouds had broken apart, revealing enough starlight for Zara to see his cheeks flush. "I'd like it if you called me that." Zara didn't know what to say. Since birth, she had been taught to address a Herman as her or Frau, or she'd suffer the consequences of offending a Nazi. Yet Bastian actually wanted her to call him by his first name, something she never expected from a high-born German like him. He was treating her like a peer instead of an underling, instead of an Unterschmisch, and she found herself surprisingly touched by this sentiment. "Very well, Bastian," she said, testing his name aloud. His dimples appeared. That wasn't too bad, was it? This was another side of Bastian that Zara had never seen before. At the academy, he always plays the part of the proper cadet, with his crisp salutes and stony face, an expression that took everyone as snobbery. But when he was here, with an easy smile and shoulders relaxed, she wondered if she was glimpsing the real Bastian, the one hidden behind his mask. His dimples slowly faded, and his properness returned. "I was hoping, when you felt ready, you could speak to the Alliance for me, or that you could put me in touch with someone who could do that." Zara didn't know how to answer him. She was starting to trust him. She had let him walk her home after all. But saying yes to his question was like a full confession of her uncle's ties to the Alliance, and that felt too dangerous. Her head was a broken puzzle of questions. I'll ask around," she said finally. Maybe she would contact Garrison to see what he thought. The Alliance was always looking for new recruits, and Bastian's medical skills could be a high boon to them, not to mention his close connection to Nazi higher-ups. As the son of a colonel, he might be able to provide vital information about Fort Goring and beyond. Bastian turned to leave but hesitated. "Thank you," he said. Zara nodded, knowing how big those two words were in this moment. "Elevate that ankle, okay?" She limped the rest of the way to the house, waving him off when he asked if she needed help. Once she reached the front door, though, Zara paused. She couldn't climb the stairs with only one good leg, not if she didn't want to wake Uncle Red. Biting her bottom lip, she peered up at her bedroom. It wouldn't take her too long to get up there and squeeze through the window. Once Bastian disappeared around the bend in the road, Zara drew the wind to her side and commanded it to lift her towards the second story of the house. Thankfully, she'd left her window unlocked, so she pried it open with her fingers and climbed inside the dark bedroom. She reached for a towel on the floor, ready to dry herself off and hop into bed. But then the bedside table lamp snapped on. Zara nearly fell over. With her pulse galloping, her gaze climbed upward until she met his furious gaze. "You have a lot of explaining to do." "Uncle Red!" Zara gasped out. Her uncle was sitting on her bed, perched there like a hungry owl. She didn't know how long he had been waiting for her, but it was obviously long enough to make his mouth curl into a scowl. Where have you been? He demanded. She leaned on her oak dresser, holding up her ankle, while she fumbled for an excuse. I went out for a walk. I couldn't sleep. You went out for a walk for over 3 hours with your leg like that? When did that happen? I tripped on the way home. Look, I'm sorry. Don't lie to me. I saw who you were with outside. Zara's blood turned cold. Her uncle had seen her with Bastian. There was no denying it then. Her lips parted, fumbling for words, but she didn't know what to say. How long have you been sneaking around with the Eckhart boy? His face bloomed red, with the top of his hairline to the tip of his beard. It was his eyes, cold and harsh, that made Zara flinch the most. Is he the reason why you're limping around? Did he hurt you? No, I told you that I tripped. He walked me home. That's it. The colonel's son walked you home? From where? He leapt off the mattress. How could you be so careless? Those German boys only want one thing. Don't you realize that? Gara gaped up at him. What was he implying? Nothing happened. I thought you were smarter than this. I thought I taught you better. There's nothing going on between us, she said, although that wasn't quite true either. Bastian knew about her power, and Zara could still remember the feel of his arm around her, even though he was only helping her home. Fury embedded itself inside Uncle Red's eyes. That's what your mother told me, too. She said that there was nothing going on, that there was nothing for me to worry about. What are you saying? Words tore out of Zara's mouth. That because my mom fell for my father, that I'll fall for the enemy too? Uncle Red stepped back, wincing. I didn't mean it like that. I'm trying to look out for you. Your mother would want the same thing. Don't tell me what she would want! In only seconds, her fear at getting caught was shoved aside and replaced with white-hot fury that flamed up her neck and spread into her fingertips. She couldn't believe what her uncle was saying, or what he was implying about her mother. Look at what you've become. Do you think that's what Mom would have wanted? The brother she knew would be out there with the Alliance instead of being so cautious that you don't do anything at all. The accusation hit its mark. Anger racked Uncle Red's face. Your mother would want you to be safe. What happens if I get involved and don't make it back? Then what? What happens to you? Heat rose inside Zara like a furnace. Now it was her fault that Uncle Red wasn't doing more for the Alliance? She was about to shout at him again. Then her hands blazed hot, burning like she had stepped into a pry. Zara blinked at the sight of her fingers, the bright pink skin that was reddening by the second. Her anger slipped away, replaced with shock. Uncle Red reached for her, but then he pulled back as soon as he touched her. I thought it stung. You have to calm down. How am I supposed to do that? Please, he pointed at her hands. You're glowing. Glowing? Zara looked at her hands again and nearly crumpled to the floor. On her left palm there was a hot ball of electricity sizzling over her skin. What's happening to me? Zara, look at me. Uncle Red took a tentative step toward her. You're going to be okay, but you have to calm down. Why do you keep saying that? She cried out. She was trying to scrape the lightning from her hand, but it flew wide, heading straight for her uncle. No! Zara shouted. It was too late. Uncle Red backpedaled into the hallway, but the ball rammed into his side, fanning over his body in a spidery wave. He crashed onto the floorboards, his cheeks slamming against the wood. Uncle Red! Zara screamed. She limped over to his body, skidding onto her knees. Tendrils of smoke steamed from his shirt. Uncle Red, she said, a sob breaking her voice. He didn't make a sound. Zara gripped her uncle by the shoulders. She cried his name one more time, but he still didn't stir. With tears dripping down her cheek, she pressed her 2 fingers against his neck. Hours seemed to pass before she found the slow thump, thump. She clutched his hand, and overwhelmed by relief. He was still alive. For now. Hold on. Do you hear me? She told him. Leaping to her feet, she limped into the kitchen and yanked the first aid kit from under the sink. She flipped through the pamphlet, scoring whatever she could find about electrocutions, because she didn't know what else to call what had happened. But its only advice was to contact the hospital. Zara threw the pamphlet back into the kit. They could never afford the medical fees, and besides, how could she explain what she had done to her uncle? Zara wished so desperately that Miss Tally was still alive. Miss Tally would have taken care of Uncle Red, and she'd taken care of Zara too. telling her that they would figure out all of these changes happening to her. Zara's gaze fell upon her hands. There was no trace of the lightning that had sprung from them. Was she developing another power? The mere thought made her tremble. Dual anomalies were so rare, so very rare. She didn't think it could be possible. But she couldn't think about that right now. She had to focus on her uncle. He needed to see a doctor, or a medic. Then it hit her. Bastian. He could check up on Uncle Red, couldn't he? He must be halfway home by now, and she didn't know where he lived. Fear clawed up Zara's throat. She was ready to drive her uncle to the hospital herself. She would deal with the fees later, but then she heard a groan from upstairs. She fumbled toward her bedroom, ignoring the pounding pain in her ankle. Uncle Red! She collapsed next to him, lying sprawling on the rough floor. He coughed and cracked open his left eye. What happened? I feel like a truck hit me. You don't remember? We were talking. No, we were fighting. He paused as the memories came back to him. Your hand, the lightning. I'm sorry. I tried to stop it. I don't know what happened. Tears flooded her eyes. But at hearing him speak and remembering what she had done to her uncle, she could have killed him. Were you manifesting another power? She hiccuped and said, I don't know. Uncle Red blinked at the ceiling, his eyes cloudy and his features slack. Zara drew her knees against her chest, forming a tight ball. She knew that look on the face. The same worry-laden look he'd given her when she first manifested years ago. Was he afraid of her now? I'm sorry, Uncle Red. I never meant... Hush. I know you didn't do it on purpose. Her gaze locked on hers, tight as a weld. I don't want you blaming yourself for this. Do you hear me? Look at you. You can barely move. I'm a little stiff, that's all. Help me up. Sarah let out a shaky laugh, but shook her head. I don't think you should get up yet. What if you go into shock? I might do that if I keep lying on this cold floor. Come on, give your old uncle a hand. Reluctantly, Zara helped him onto his feet, and did her best to tuck him into bed while balancing on her healthy ankle. Uncle Red's eyes fluttered as soon as his head hit the pillow. I'll get you a glass of water. No. Let me sleep for a few hours. He reached out and clasped her hand. Zara, about that boy. There's nothing going on with him. I don't want you speaking to him again. Are we clear on that? Perfectly. Zara fidgeted. She didn't want to lie to him, especially not when he was in this condition. But she didn't know what else to say. She couldn't tell him about Bastian, that Bastian wanted to join the Alliance, and she definitely couldn't say that Bastian knew about one of her powers. One more thing, Uncle Red said, fighting off sleep. We have to control this new power of yours. You'll have to learn how to harness it, like you did last time. This has to be your #1 priority. Zara's gaze plummeted to the floor. Maybe she could have been excited about her new power if she hadn't electrocuted her uncle, the only family she had left. Right now, though, the last thing she wanted to see was those lightning bolts shoot out of her hand again. You can't risk having an episode, he said. We can talk about this later, when you're better. Uncle Red wouldn't hear of it. We're not going to go away. It's not going to go away. And we have to get you started on your training. The sooner the better, okay? Do you have to be so stubborn? Of course. I'm a St. James. That made him crack a smile, although it soon vanished as soon as he started coughing. You really should drink some water. He ignored her. Listen to me. You have to control this new power. Promise me that. He took her hand, squeezing it, and Zara knew he wouldn't let it go until she agreed with him. She swallowed. I promise, Uncle Red. Once Uncle Red fell asleep, Zara stayed in his room, curled in a blanket next to his bed with an ice pack lying across her ankle. She tried to get some rest, but she jolted awake whenever her uncle coughed or groaned. After a while, she gave up on sleeping and made sure to check his pulse every hour, along with touching his forehead, in case he had a fever, a sign of shock. His face did feel warm to the touch, but not quite fever-hot. She worried about it nonetheless. The hours stretched by, but Zara didn't awaken. In the morning, Zara called in sick for work, using one of her precious leave days. But her uncle's life was far more important than a handful of Reichsmarks. She'd easily give up her annual salary for him to get better, or at least a doctor's visit. She thought about calling Bastian, but she didn't know his phone number, and she didn't want to risk having the colonel pick up. At 5 in the evening, a knock on the front door jolted Zara from her worried daze. She wondered if the academy administrator had come to check on her, to see if she was really sick. When she opened the door, she found Bastian sitting on the porch, still wearing his uniform and with his school bag slung over one shoulder. His eyes red, as if he'd been crying. Zara tensed. "What's wrong?" Her frazzled nerves made her hands shake. Had someone found out about them being at the courthouse last night? She couldn't handle that right now, especially not on top of her uncle's wounds. "It's nothing," he said quickly. "I was worried about you. You didn't show up at work, so I came as soon as the practice was over." His gaze flirted over her and into the house. "Is your uncle home? I didn't want to intrude." "He's upstairs. He's had an accident." "Is he all right?" "It was an electrical shock. A fuse must have blown last night." Zara tucked her hands behind her back, not wanting to think about what she had done to her uncle. "Actually, I'm really glad that you came by. Can you take a look at him?" Bastian stepped into the house. "Did you bring him to the hospital yet?" That wasn't an option. Bastian could have probably figured out by the state of the house that Zara never would have been able to pay the medical fees. Shame coursed through her. Most of the cupboards were still broken after the colonel's raid, and a sea of water stains swam over the ceiling like ink blots. Bastian, however, didn't look at the cupboards or the ceiling. His eyes were fixed on her. "Have you given him any medicine?" "Only a sleeping draught. He was tossing and turning for hours, so I thought that would be okay." Tears wet Zara's eyes as her exhaustion overtook her. She was tired to her very bones, but she couldn't sleep until she made sure her uncle would be okay. "Will you take a look at him, please, Bastian?" His face seemed to soften when he said his name. "Let me get my medical bag from my car." "Your car?" Bastian peered outside, past Bastian, but she didn't see any vehicles aside from her uncle's truck. Seeing the look on her face, Bastian explained, "I parked next to the barn. I didn't want anyone getting suspicious." Immediately, Zara understood. The barn would obscure Bastian's car from the road, and she felt a flood of release at his cautiousness. Together they headed for the barn, Zara walking with a slight hobble. The swelling had gone down since yesterday, but her foot throbbed as she put too much weight on it. Still, her ankle was nothing compared to what her uncle had put her through. She had put her uncle through. It took Bastian a few minutes to notice her limp. After they left the eyes, his eyes had gone all foggy again, like his head was wandering somewhere else. "You shouldn't be walking on your ankle yet," he said, frowning. "I'm fine. I iced it last night." "Did something happen today? You seem—" "It's fine." His finger reached for a dog tags, but they weren't hanging around his neck yesterday. "Is it about last night?" "No, it's about my mother. She's not well." He continued toward his car. "You should rest your ankle. I'll get my bag. It won't take long." She matched his pace. "Is your mom okay?" When he hesitated, she mumbled a quick, "Sorry, it's none of my business." "No, I don't mind. You're the first person to notice something was bothering me." His lips formed a sad smile, and his knuckles turned white as he gripped the straps of his backpack. My mother wandered outside again, and it took us nearly half an hour." Oh, crud, I lost my thing. My mother... Oh, jeez, I really lost my place again. That's not good. No, I don't mind. My mother wandered outside again, and it took us nearly an hour to find her. My father wants to send her to a facility. "What sort of facility?" "For people with brain injuries. There are a few treatments that might help her." Father found a place in New Berlin. "He didn't discuss you with this at all?" "Colonel Eckhart doesn't believe in that sort of discussion. He's already packed her things." He stepped over a puddle and helped Zara to jump over it. "He took Opa's dog tags, too. Told me I shouldn't wear anything that belonged to a strater." "What a Schweinhund," Zara said before she could stop herself. A look of horror crossed her face as she realized what she had called his father a swine. "I'm sorry. I shouldn't have—" "You don't need to apologize," said Shook slowly. "I don't know what my mother saw in him. I don't know what my mother saw in my father either," Zara thought. She stared at the fields ahead. They'd only spent a few hours last night together, but he was confiding her as if they had known each other for years. But it didn't feel uncomfortable. Strangely enough, Bastian knew what it was like to have a father he was ashamed of, just like her. "Feels good to say that aloud," he admitted, as they reached the car. "The cadets and soldiers idolized my father, so I had to keep it all to myself." His gaze flitted over to her. In the soft light of the setting sun, the green flecks in his eyes made his irises appear almost hazel. They'd never call him a Schweinhund. I shouldn't have said that. He's your father. A father who's a definite Schweinhund. He laughed, a rich, buttery sound that broke through the bleakness on his face. Bastian retrieved his medical bag from his BMW sedan, an old satchel made of worn leather that must have belonged to his grandfather. Once they returned to the house, Zara showed him to her uncle's bedroom. Something shifted in Bastian. His shoulders straightened and a hard determination conquered his eyes, chasing away the earlier sadness. He worked like a battle-seasoned doctor, none of his usual shyness to be seen, checking Uncle Red's pulse and then his temperature and breathing. But Bastian's hands paused when he examined the red spidery marks that snaked along Uncle Red's chest. Is he going to be all right? Zara said, hovering beside the bed. He needs rest and plenty of fluids. Bastian's fingers fanned across the marks. These burns should fade after a few days, too. How did you get injured? An electrical shock? Zara nodded. I've only seen those burns once before, at Opa's clinic, when a little girl was struck by lightning. They're called Lichberg figures. I don't know how he got those. Maybe he went outside last night? There was a storm, remember? Zara's mind flooded with images of ball lightning sizzling in her hand, making her dizzy, making her clamp her eyes shut. She wouldn't have another episode. She wouldn't hurt her uncle again. It's all right, Bastian said, walking over to the side of the bed. You've had a long night. Can you... I did this to him, Zara blurted out. She wished she could fold up the memories of last night and top them into a fire, but she couldn't. I never meant to hurt him. What do you mean? His voice was calm, and because of that the story tumbled out of Zara's lips. She told him everything, about her fight with her uncle, about the strange bolts of lightning that had formed on her hands. With every word she spoke, she waited for Bastian to flinch and back away. But he only stood there, listening. You're a dual anomaly, he said, looking a bit odd. Hearing Bastian say those words, dual anomaly, finally cemented for Zara what she was. A part of her thrilled at this realization. There are only a handful of dual anomalies in the world. After all, the rest of her quivered at the revelation. She never thought she could have a second power, much less one as destructive as conjuring lightning. Her first ability felt so freeing, flying over the fields, the breeze nimble against her skin, but this one only reminded her of heat and fury, a stinging in her bloodstream to be let out. Have you had another incident since last night? Said Bastian. No, nothing. They stared at each other, thinking the unspoken, how Zara's secret was now twice as deadly, and twice as likely to anger the Nazis if they found out a Michelin was a dual anomaly. I don't know what to do. Wind I could handle, but lightning, don't worry, Bastian said, his eyes bright as gold. I think I have an idea. And that is the end of Chapter 13. Chapter 14 will be when things get really exciting. So really excited for that. And I think that is about it for this video. Make sure to like, subscribe, and comment down below. Don't forget to come back next week for our next video. Unless, of course, things happen and I'm not able to get it out, in which case it'll be maybe middle of the week or sometime after. Anyway, I'll see you guys later.